Hey there, Griff Hamlin here from Blues Guitar Unleashed. Welcome, thanks for joining me today. In today's video, we're going to talk about a very standard, very classic thing called an arpeggio. But I'm going to very much bluesify this and show you how to kind of combine it with the major blues sound to really accent the particular chord. This is going to involve 2 or 3 different things. It's entirely possible that I may refer to something that maybe you're not totally comfortable with yet, but I have other videos that will get you comfortable with those things. So if you'll kind of bear with me for a few minutes till I can sort of wrap this all up and put it all together, it's gonna make a lot more sense. So I just wanna let you know, it's gonna take me a few minutes to get going here, but once I do, I think you'll see it's a really advantageous thing to have this under your fingers and in your arsenal. So let's talk about what I mean, okay? And what I'm gonna get at here is chords that you hopefully already know, okay? And this is, I think, what makes this really important. An arpeggio is playing the notes of a chord one at a time, okay? So if you have, the basic A7, root on the 6th string bar chord, you may know that chord, but what you may not know, and what is fundamentally important to this, is what each note's function is. For example, that is the root. We call this the 5th. Now, if you don't know any music theory, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 notes in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is the 5th note in the scale. So I'm going to try to keep this theory minimal, but that is the root. That is the 5th. This note here is what we call the flatted 7th. It is what makes a dominant chord dominant. Instead of the natural 7th, we have a flatted, meaning lowered by 1 half step or 1 fret. So root, 5th, flatted 7th, 3rd, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. That is the 3rd. Another 5th and another root. Now, if you happen to know the variation of that chord where you put your pinky over there on the 8th fret of the 2nd string, that is a flatted 7th. If you don't know that, now you do. It's a pretty cool little thing you can add. Okay, so that is our chord. Now, as you may have already put together, the notes in a dominant 7th chord are the root, a 3rd, a 5th, and a flatted 7th. Maybe you already knew that, maybe you didn't. That's okay. Either way works just fine. Obviously, if we go from root to 5th, we skipped 1. We skipped a 3rd, okay? Well, this 3rd is here. If we use the fact that we have octaves, that means we have another 3rd right here, okay? So this is A. Right here, I'm playing at the 5th fret of the 6th string. The first 3rd that comes along, even though we don't play it in the chord, is this C sharp here at the 4th fret of the 5th string. Okay, so even though we don't play that, we could use it, right? Then we have the 5th, E, the flatted 7th, which is a G natural. Now, theoretically, I could play that next to A, even though we don't, okay? But if I can play A once, I can play it again. C sharp, E, okay, and those are all in the chord. Remember I told you about that little G you could add at the 8th fret of the 2nd string? If we go root, 3rd, 5th, and there's our flatted 7th, and then we're back up to the A at the very, very top. Okay, so if we put those all together and we play them a little bit easier to finger, we'd start with our middle finger, and we'd get A, C sharp, E, G, A, C sharp, E, G, A, and if you wanted, C sharp way up there, but I'm probably not going to use it. And there you have it. Okay, A, C sharp, E, G. Now you'll notice that I kind of separated that. Okay? That is because if I was on this A, for example, I could play it in the same way. Or here, or here. Okay, theoretically, I can play that anywhere, just that little bit. This is sort of a second octave. I could conceivably play that down here, or here. There's a lot of different places that I can play that. So basically, I've sort of got two different shapes that I squished together. And I want to point that out because when I was younger and I was learning these arpeggio shapes, I never noticed that. I never noticed that it was actually two octaves. It was two one-octave shapes crammed together. And for years, I only played it that way. And then one day I realized it was two separate octaves and I could move either one of those anywhere I wanted. And it was this huge eureka moment for me. So I'm going to throw that out there for you. You may not be experienced enough to really appreciate that. But if you have a little bit of experience with arpeggios, that might be the light bulb moment for you that it was for me. Silly as it sounds. Oops, sorry. So, that is the first thing you have to get under your fingers. Okay, root, third, fifth, flat, seventh. Root, third, fifth, flat, seventh, root. Now, I'm going to play the A major blues scale, which is root, second. Actually, I'm going to play the pentatonic. Root, second, third, fifth, sixth, root, second, third, fifth, sixth, root. You might know this as box 2 of the pentatonic scale. Okay, now what you might also know is that we can add, I'll say, a blue note to that. And it comes right before the third. So we have root, second, flat, third, third. Fifth, sixth, root, second, flat, third, third. Right? That little move that we do so often is flat, third, third, fifth, sixth, root. Right out of the major blues scale. Okay, well here's the thing. Over an A7 chord, we can play either the A major blues scale, which we do a lot, and it sounds really, really good. And the reason that it sounds good is because it has the same root, the same fifth, the same third, okay? But notice that there's no seventh in that scale. 1, 2, flat, 3, 3, 5, 6, no seven of any kind, root. Well, remember that our arpeggio also has a root, doesn't have a second, does have a third, does have a fifth, doesn't have a sixth, but it has a flatted seventh. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to sort of imagine both of those things on my guitar fretboard at the same time. Now, there are some people that will say, oh, well, you just added a note to the major blues scale. Sure, you can look at it that way. That's not a problem at all. I don't look at it that way. You could say, some people might say, oh, well, you took the flatted seventh from the minor blues scale and you put it in with the major blues scale. That's fine too, if you prefer to think of it that way. I'm choosing to look at it as adding this note from the arpeggio to my major blues sound. But any way that you want to think about adding a flat seventh to your major blues scale will work, as long as you put it in there. That's what matters, is that we want to add it, okay? So the huge thing here is that I'm going to have a root, a third, which notice how I kind of did that little bluesify thing. You'll sometimes hear me talk about bluesifying the third. And when I say I'm bluesifying the third, I'm using that flat third always before the third. So even if I play, like let's say I just had an A7 chord. Let's say that I just had my looper here, and I play just an A7 chord. And I wanted to just use the arpeggio over it. Okay, it's gonna get a little blocky. It's really quickly gonna get a little blocky, right? It just doesn't, now obviously some of that is because I'm just playing eighth notes all the time. And if I made it a little bit cooler as far as my rhythms, that might also help. But notice that as soon as I start adding the flatted third, so root, flat third to third, fifth, flat seventh, root, flat third, fifth, flat seventh. Okay, so by using that flatted third, all of that time I'm just playing the arpeggio notes. Okay, well, the arpeggio notes are four, that's four notes. The major pentatonic scale is 5 notes. It's not like I'm missing a whole lot, right? But it is a really kind of a cool way to look at the fretboard. Now, again, I know that there's 20 different ways that you can justify adding the flatted seventh to a major blues scale. I know that. We can say we're pulling it from the minor. We can say we're pulling it from the arpeggio. We can say we're pulling it just out of thin air. It doesn't matter. The Mixolydian mode. There's all different ways to justify that flatted seventh. What I have found, though, is that the method that you choose will influence how you play. Okay, so the way that I choose to justify a certain note or a certain idea is going to not only affect that single note, but some of the other notes that I tend to choose to play around it. And that's why I use the arpeggio as sort of the basis for my explanation. By doing that, I have a tendency to play those chord tones. Well, guess which notes tend to sound the best over any given chord tones. Now, the last thing I have to tell you is that if you kind of practice with this, with any single chord, okay, obviously a blues has 3 chords. So a blues in A would have A7, D7, and E7. Well, I can't continue to play this when the chord changes to anything else. Okay, so this will work over any A7 chord. It doesn't matter what key I'm in. It doesn't matter anything else. What it will not do is it will not survive an entire 12 bar in the key of A. Okay, because once we go to D7 and once we go to E7, the C sharp that we're using from that A7 arpeggio is not going to jive with those other chords. It jives sort of with the E. It sounds a little awkward at times, but it's not horrible. It will not jive with the D at all because the D7 will have a C natural in it that will clash very badly against the C sharp that you play. So when you go to the 4 and the 5 chords, you do have to switch back over to your minor pentatonic or your minor blues scale. But what you could do in its place, right, is when it goes to a D, I can go up there and play. Now you might think, oh, but that's a really, really bad jump. You know, it's not so much. This A shows up here. Okay, if I'm playing in A, and then I go up to E, then D, and then A. Sorry, I kind of got ham-fisted there for a second. So you see, by using that same little arpeggio pattern, I can follow the chords just fine. It may or may not necessarily always be ideal, but it will work and it will be okay. You're not actually completely changing the entire range of what you're playing just because you're moving horizontally. The guitar doesn't really work that way. We can move an entire 12 frets just to get one octave, but that's also an octave, right? So I have to go a long way laterally to really get out of the same region that I've been in. Okay, so don't worry about it. Just learn this one arpeggio shape, this one idea. Remember to bluesify the third of it, and then start to try to combine it with your box 2, your major blues sound. And there's a lot of really, really fantastic ideas in there. There's a lot of great music to be had just by adding that one extra note. And keep in mind that in my mind, I'm kind of flipping back and forth. Like I'm actually thinking of the arpeggio and playing those notes. And then I might play a few notes, and then I'll actually think about the major pentatonic scale and play a few of those notes. It's kind of like I switch back and forth, switch back and forth, switch back and forth. I don't generally play it all as one big scale. It kind of sounds chromatic. I don't really like the sound of that. It's not generally how it's used, okay? So mess around with it, play with it, try it out. Now, if you dig the sound, arpeggios sound awesome. Where most people, kind of go awry is they don't understand about bluesifying the third. So they play the arpeggios, they think it sounds really classical or it sounds really stiff and it just doesn't really work. They're actually fantastic. It's just you have to make them bluesy. You have to use those flatted thirds. You have to use those flatted sevenths. You have to also occasionally pull it back and go play some blues scale. Like you have to kind of use them just like every other flavor to taste. We don't want to get too ramped up or too invested in one specific approach. We want to have a lot of different approaches to choose from. That's going to give us the variety that makes solos sound really interesting, okay? Of course, I do have a course called Chord by Chord Blues Soloing that really gets into this. So if you like it, if you think this is a cool sound, might be something you want to investigate, I'll try and remember to leave a link near this video. As always, I'm Griff Hamlin from Blues Guitar Unleashed. Thank you for joining me. If you have guitar playing friends that you think would get something out of this video, I hope you'll share it with them. And I'll leave a variety of links to a variety of stuff near this video if you want to check it out further. Thanks for joining me. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.